The Zhou dynasty was one of China's major dynasties, ruling for nearly 8 centuries until its fall in 256 BCE. Historians usually divide it into the Western and Eastern Zhou, with the Eastern Zhou further subdivided into the Spring and Autumn period and the Warring States period. Although the Zhou dynasty was one of the most formative in Chinese history, much of it remains poorly understood because of its complexity and the fragmentary nature of the sources. In the previous video, we examined the Western Zhou and the Spring and Autumn period. In this video, we will do the same for the first half of the Warring States period. During the Spring and Autumn period, the authority of the Zhou kings, ruling from their capital at Luoyi, had largely become symbolic, while powerful states competed with one another for dominance. For much of this period, warfare focused on hegemony and influence rather than outright conquest, although as the period went on, states grew increasingly aggressive. The Warring States period marked the culmination of this trend. States no longer sought merely to lead, but to conquer and annex their rivals outright. The Warring States period ended in 221 BCE, when the western state of Qin conquered the eastern states and established the Qin dynasty. The king of Qin declared himself the first emperor, beginning an imperial tradition that lasted until 1911. After the conquest of the eastern states, the first emperor ordered the destruction of historical records from the conquered states. As a result, the Warring States period is among the most poorly documented in Chinese history, arguably even more so than the Spring and Autumn period before it. Almost all accounts about this period have been pieced together by historians, both ancient and modern, from fragmentary sources, many containing exaggerations, tall tales, and outright misinformation. As archaeology has now begun to recover texts from bamboo and wooden slips, a clearer picture may eventually emerge, one that is more grounded in reality, but ultimately less colorful than the version that has come down to us. The Warring States period takes its name from an ancient text known as the 战国策, that is, the strategies of the Warring States. Although it was compiled more than a century after the period ended and often blurs the line between careful record-keeping and exaggeration, it has profoundly shaped how the era is remembered. In its pages, states and their leading figures cast aside traditions and hierarchies, competing with ruthless intensity to gain every possible advantage for survival. Perhaps because of the influence of the 战国策, our memory of the Warring States carries a dramatic intensity that few other periods in Chinese history can match. There is no definitive start date to the Warring States period, and it is variously placed at 481, 475, 468, 453, and 403 BCE. For a people as meticulous about record-keeping as the ancient Chinese, this level of uncertainty can seem almost unconscionable, but there are good reasons for this. First, the Warring States was not a dynastic era, but a period defined by a particular set of themes and patterns, so it is only natural that different historians have chosen different years to mark its beginning. Second, of our two main sources about the previous period, the Spring and Autumn Annals covers events up to 481 and the 左传 to 468, two of the proposed starting years for the Warring States. After that, we enter nearly a century for which only scattered records survive, and by the time our sources become dense again in the mid-300s BCE, the harsher, more competitive world of the Warring States had already taken shape. In a way, what is the point of insisting on a precise starting year when so little is actually known about an entire century? With all this in mind, let us begin with a geographical survey of China at the beginning of the Warring States in the mid-400s. In the north was the state of Jin, ruled by a branch of the Zhou royal house. Centered on the lower Fen River Valley, Jin benefited from exceptionally favorable geography, protected by mountains and the Yellow River. This gave it a secure base from which to expand outward, particularly southward into the Central Plains, the vast, wealthy, and densely populated region between the Yellow and Huai rivers. Jin was one of the dominant powers for much of the Spring and Autumn period, so much so that historians would quip that half of the Spring and Autumn Annals is essentially the history of Jin. By the early 400s, Jin remained highly influential. In the south, in the basin of the Middle Yangtze River and its longest tributary, the Han River, lay the state of Chu. Unlike Jin, which traced its origins to the Zhou royal house, Chu was a non-Zhou southern power, often dismissed by snooty northerners as outsiders. Throughout the spring and autumn period, Chu repeatedly expanded northward into the Central Plains, only to be checked by Jin and its allies. But nonetheless, by the early to mid-400s, Chu was firmly established in the southern Central Plains, annexing the states of Chen and Cai in the 400s. Chu was by far the largest state in China, although its size made centralization difficult. Its mid-Yangtze heartland, along with various vast, sparsely populated southern regions inhabited by long-lost local cultures, differed sharply from the newly conquered lands of Chen and Cai, both prestigious Zhou states. The rulers of Chu were often weak, constrained by powerful nobles unwilling to surrender their traditional privileges. As a result, despite its immense resources and manpower, Chu remained a sleeping giant, perpetually unable to fully get its act together. Several other noteworthy states lay on the Central Plains between Jin and Chu. Wei, once a prestigious state founded by the Zhou royal family, had by this point become a rump state firmly within Jin's orbit. Zheng, also founded by the Zhou royal house, was coveted by its more powerful neighbors for its wealth and central location. Then there was Song, another prestigious state. Song's ruling house descended from the Shang dynasty royal family. By the mid-400s, Song remained an important regional player and a key buffer between Jin and Chu. In the west stood the state of Qin, based in the remote western half of the Wei River Valley. Qin had non-Zhou origins, and for much of its early history, its expansion into the richer eastern regions was blocked by Jin. Qin often maintained good relations with Chu, linked by a direct route through the Qin Mountains. Now let us turn to the east. In the far northeast, around modern Beijing, lay the state of Yan. Remote and relatively poor, Yan barely featured on the geopolitical map of this period. In the southeast was the state of Yue in the Yangtze River Delta. Like Chu, Yue was founded by a non-Zhou southern people, and Yue was often a generic term the Chinese use for many indigenous southern groups. In the mid-400s, Yue had just emerged victorious from a long struggle against its bitter rival Wu, conquering it outright. From there, Yue expanded aggressively northward, pushing into the edges of the Central Plains. Around Mount Tai and across the Shandong Peninsula lay the states of Qi and Lu. By the mid-400s, Lu was little more than a regional rump, although it remained culturally influential due to its strong association with the Zhou royal house. Confucius came from Lu and taught there, promoting traditional Zhou values to students from across China. Qi, by contrast, had long been the dominant regional power. Its ruling house did not descend from the Zhou royal family, and it was known for its strength in commerce, particularly the trade in fish and salt. Qi had been one of the first hegemons of the spring and autumn period in the mid-600s, before largely withdrawing from broader interstate leadership for the ensuing 200 years. A final region worth mentioning is the basin of the Huai and Si rivers. In antiquity, the Huai River flowed directly into the sea, and the Si River was one of its largest tributaries. By the mid-400s, this region had become one of the richest parts of China in both agriculture and trade, yet it remained politically fragmented. The major players here had traditionally been Lu and Song, although by the mid-400s it was increasingly drawing the attention of more distant powers such as Qi and Chu. Now that we have surveyed the major states of the mid-400s, we should turn back to Jin. For much of the previous 2 centuries, Jin had relied heavily on its great noble families to run its military and administration. Over time, this reduced the Jin rulers to little more than figureheads, while the noble families increasingly fought against one another. By the mid-400s, the previous 6 great families had been reduced to 4: Zhi, Han, Zhao, and Wei. Zhi, the strongest of the 4, allied with Han and Wei to attack Zhao and laid siege to its base at Jinyang, modern Taiyuan. But fearing that Zhi would become unstoppable if Zhao were destroyed, Han and Wei instead colluded with Zhao and turned on Zhi. Zhi was destroyed, and Han, Zhao, and Wei partitioned its territories among themselves. This year, 453 BCE, marked the emergence of Han, Zhao, and Wei as major political players, and is often cited as another one of the starting dates of the Warring States period. Han, Zhao, and Wei jointly controlled the Jin government for the next 5 decades. Collectively known as the Three Jin, they blurred the line between independent states and semi-autonomous parts of a single state. In 403, the three persuaded the Zhou king to formally elevate them from vassals of Jin to Zhuhou, direct vassals of the Zhou crown. In traditional Chinese historiography, this event was seen as the final nail in the coffin of the old social order, and so 403 has been used as the final proposed starting date of the Warring States period. Jin itself lingered on as a rump state until it was annexed by Wei in 369. Because Han, Zhao, and Wei all began as vassals of Jin, their territories were originally interspersed, and in their early years they often exchanged land to form more contiguous blocks. Even so, their boundaries remained highly irregular. Han was the most centrally located and the weakest of the three. Its territory centered on its capital at Pingyang, modern Linfen, in the lower Fen River Valley, and extended eastward into the rugged highlands of the Shandong region. Zhao was the northernmost of the three and effectively existed in 2 main zones: its original mountainous core around Jinyang and a southern zone on the North China Plain. Communication between these 2 zones was frequently threatened by the small regional state of Zhongshan. Wei's territorial shape was even more unstable than Zhao's. It was divided into western and eastern halves, with Han sitting between them. In Wei, Marquis Wen ruled for nearly 50 years until his death in 396. Wen, meaning scholarly or cultured, was one of the most prestigious posthumous names available to a sovereign. Externally, he used diplomacy to keep the 3 Jin states aligned, allowing them to collectively fulfill Jin's former hegemonic role, with Wei as the senior partner. Internally, he oversaw major reforms, relying heavily on his minister Li Kui, who codified laws, promoted officials based on merit rather than birth, and improved tax collection. He brought increasing amounts of territory under direct state control, creating some of the first xian counties in Chinese history, each governed by a centrally appointed administrator. The county would become the fundamental unit of Chinese administration down to the present day. Along the frontier, he established some of the first Jun commanderies, initially intended as militarized frontier zones. One of the earliest was Xihe Commandery, with Xihe meaning west of the Yellow River, which Wei expanded into under the leadership of the general Wu Qi. Under Marquis Wen, Wei became the leading state in China. Wei's fragmented geography was both a strength and a critical weakness. The western half, where its capital at Anyi was located, lay in the former heartland of Jin, with strong natural defenses, while the eastern half lay in the central plains, the very region Jin had long sought to dominate. In this sense, Wei effectively inherited Jin's geopolitical niche. Its spread-out territory also placed it close to much of Han and Zhao, giving it significant leverage over its allies. The challenge, however, was balancing expansion with diplomacy. If Wei became too aggressive, its fragmented geography also left it vulnerable to attacks from multiple directions. Marquis Wen was succeeded by Marquis Wu, who ruled from 396 to 370. Wu means marshal, and under his reign, Wei, usually at the head of the 3 Jin, fought frequent wars against neighboring states. But even as Wei maintained its leadership within the 3 Jin, the alliance was weakening. Conflicts increasingly arose between Wei and Zhao, and at times the two went to war. This was only natural. By this point, the 3 states had been independent for several generations, with each expanding into new territories, establishing new ruling elites, and developing new interests. By the mid-300s BCE, Han, Zhao, and Wei had reached roughly their final geopolitical forms. Zhao still existed in 2 separate zones, but increasingly oriented itself toward the wealthy North China Plain, eventually moving its capital to Handan. Han carved out a direct southward route into the Central Plains, conquered the small but wealthy state of Zheng in 375, and eventually moved its capital to Zheng's former capital at Xinzheng. Han's final, highly convoluted territory consisted of three main parts. 1. Its original holdings in the Fen River Basin and Shangdang. 2. The former lands of Zheng. And 3. The key mountainous corridor west of the Zhou capital at Luoyi. Despite its irregular borders, this geography was surprisingly functional, as most of Han's territory remained accessible from Xinzheng. Wei continued to be divided into two main regions. Its western zone, centered on its capital at Anyi, expanded west of the Yellow River, while its eastern zone on the Central Plains also expanded significantly. This divided geography was not as detrimental as it may appear on the map, as Wei frequently exercised strong influence over Han, whose territory it largely surrounded. Marquis Wu of Wei was succeeded by King Hui. Yes, king. In 344 BCE, he proclaimed himself king, placing himself on equal footing with the Zhou ruler. He ruled for 50 years, from 369 to 319, and his ambitions matched his bold title. One of his most consequential decisions was to move Wei's capital from Anyi to Daliang, the predecessor of modern Kaifeng, on the Central Plains. King Hui ordered the construction of the Honggou, a canal linking the Yellow River to tributaries of the Huai River. It provided irrigation in what was already one of the most fertile agricultural regions in China and turned Daliang into a major transportation hub, allowing it to grow rapidly into one of the largest cities of its time. The city's central location greatly expanded Wei's geopolitical reach, but its lack of natural defenses also left it with far less margin for error. Unlike his predecessors, who had been careful not to alarm Wei's neighbors, King Hui pushed aggressively on multiple fronts, including against Han and Zhao. In 354, he invaded Zhao, prompting Zhao to seek help from Qi. The following year, under the guidance of the strategist Sun Bin, instead of relieving Zhao directly, the Qi army struck at Daliang itself, forcing Wei to abandon its campaign and rush home. This episode is memorialized in the famous stratagem Wei Wei Jiu Zhao, surround Wei to rescue Zhao, and highlights the risks King Hui accepted by placing his capital on the open plains. Nonetheless, after the initial setback, Wei, with help from its ally Han, resumed its offensive against Zhao, eventually capturing Handan before returning it to Zhao in a peace settlement. In 342, Wei again went on the offensive, this time against Han, which also appealed to Qi for help. After waiting for the Wei army to exhaust itself, Qi again targeted Daliang. The following year, the Wei army hurried back and pursued the retreating Qi forces, only to be annihilated in an ambush at Maling. This crushing defeat marked the beginning of Wei's long decline. The apogee and decline of Wei coincided with the resurgence of Qi. There, power had long rested with the Jiang ruling house, but during the early Warring States period, it steadily shifted into the hands of the Tian noble family, which fully replaced the Jiangs as rulers of Qi in 379. In the mid to late 300s, King Wei of Qi, yes, he too elevated himself to kingship, promoted capable officials, including the minister Zhou Ji, and carried out reforms, although details of these reforms are largely lost. In one story, he met King Hui during a hunting expedition, and when King Hui boasted of his wealth and treasures, he replied that his true treasures were the generals and administrators who kept Qi safe from invasion. He oversaw the Qi victory against Wei at the Battle of Maling. In the years after Maling, Qi overtook Wei as the leading power in China, and even King Hui of Wei visited Qi to pay his respects. Qi was densely populated and resource-rich, with fertile farmland along the lower Yellow River, a strong commercial tradition based on coastal salt and fish production, and access to productive iron deposits near its capital at Linzi, a region that remains an industrial center even today. Linzi was another one of the largest and wealthiest cities of the period, noted both for its commerce and as a center of scholarship. In the south, the state of Chu continued to attempt centralization with mixed success. the general and statesman Wu Qi left Wei and entered the service of the Chu king, introducing reforms that strengthened central authority. But after the king died in 381, angry nobles attempted to assassinate Wu Qi during the king's funeral. Knowing he would not survive, Wu Qi threw himself onto the king's corpse, causing the arrows fired at him to also strike the king's body. The new king subsequently executed all the nobles involved in the assassination, along with their families, for defiling the royal corpse. A recurring theme throughout this century was Chu being gradually pushed out of its former romping ground in the northern central plains by Han and Wei. The Wei capital at Daliang, for example, stood on land once controlled by Chu. To the east, Chu fought prolonged wars against Yue. Although details of these wars are virtually non-existent, by the late 300s, Chu had expanded to the sea, reducing Yue to minor regional remnants. In the west, the state of Qin had been the punching bag of Wei during the early decades of the Warring States. It was pushed to the remote western half of the Wei River Valley, where it was largely cut off from the rest of China. In 361, Duke Xiao came to power and, with Qin facing significant pressure from Wei and Chu, began recruiting talented people to strengthen Qin. His call was answered by Shang, who came from the state of Wei in the Central Plains, where legalism was influential, and had served as an official in Wei, but felt underappreciated. Shang arrived in Qin with a copy of Li Kui's law code and persuaded Duke Xiao to carry out sweeping reforms despite strong resistance from the nobility. Before announcing his first set of laws in 356, Shang feared he would not be taken seriously. He ordered a 30-foot wooden pole erected at the southern gate of the capital's market and offered 10 pieces of gold to anyone who would move it to the northern gate. The reward was so ridiculously large for such a mundane task that no one took it seriously. Shang then raised the reward to 50 pieces of gold, and someone finally took the offer. Upon completing the task, the man was immediately paid in full, demonstrating that Shang government stood behind its promises. Shang first set of laws made sweeping changes to Qin society. He suppressed teachings associated with traditional Zhou rituals and imposed heavy punishments for even minor crimes, on the premise that if people feared small offenses, they would avoid greater ones. To enforce strict adherence, he organized households into groups of 10. If one person broke the law, those who reported it were rewarded, while those who did not do so were executed. Travelers needed official documents to stay in lodgings, and hosts who sheltered undocumented guests were punished. Hiding a fugitive was treated as surrendering to the enemy. Private fighting was banned, and military merit became the primary path to advancement through a 20-rank system based on enemy heads taken in battle. These ranks determined access to land, wealth, and government positions, and were accessible to commoners. Even members of the ruling family could not enjoy noble privileges without military achievement. Agriculture was heavily promoted. Productive farmers were rewarded with exemptions, while unproductive ones could be enslaved. Families with more than 2 sons who did not divide into separate households faced double taxation, helping to ensure stricter administrative order and more taxable units and labor. Merchants, not that Qin had much of a mercantile tradition anyway, were tightly controlled. They had to register their slaves for state labor, faced heavy taxes, were banned from trading in grains, and were restricted from access to key natural resources. In 350, Shang passed a second set of reforms that built on the first. These abolished the traditional Zhou well-field system and distributed land directly to farmers. Local administrative units were reorganized into counties under direct central authority, and even the nobles lost their traditional fiefs. The Qin capital was moved eastward to Xianyang in the central Wei River Valley, bringing Qin into closer involvement with eastern affairs. Systems of weights and measures were standardized. Some earlier Qin practices, such as adult sons remaining in the same household as their fathers, were banned, weakening large family units and improving tax collection. This eventually had unintended consequences. Dividing property left some poorer households unable to meet their tax obligations, forcing them into dependence on wealthier families. Shangyang's reforms were understandably met with fierce resistance. Even the heir of the duke broke them, and Shangyang responded by punishing the heir's teacher. Over time, people became afraid to openly oppose the new laws, and they took hold. The reforms rapidly strengthened Qin, and taking advantage of Wei overstretching itself in the Central Plains, Qin launched a series of eastward invasions, winning several victories. But after Duke Xiao died in 338, Shangyang was accused of treason, and the new ruler of Qin moved to arrest him. Shangyang fled, but could not find lodging, as his own laws punished harshly those who sheltered anyone without proper documents. He eventually sought asylum in Wei, but the people there detested him for his invasions and handed him back to Qin. In a final desperate attempt to save himself, Shangyang returned to his fief in the Shang region and launched a rebellion, only to be defeated. As a warning to others, he was executed by being torn apart by chariots, and his entire family was also killed. But whatever personal dislike the new ruler of Qin may have had for Shangyang, he recognized the significance of the reforms and kept them in place, allowing Qin to preserve the gains of the previous 2 decades. Qin continued to grow under this ruler, known in history as King Huiwen, the first Qin ruler to assume the title of king. In 333, Qin defeated Wei in battle, and after several more years of fighting, conquered all of Wei's territory west of the Yellow River, finally securing for itself a natural frontier. Ultimately, Shangyang's economic and centralization reforms allowed Qin to adequately utilize the agricultural potential of the Wei River Valley, which, although less fertile than the eastern plains, was sufficiently productive and, more importantly, well protected to serve as the core of an expansionist state. By the time King Huiwen declared himself king in 325, Qin had emerged as one of the leading states in China. By the late 300s, the general layout of what later generations would call the 7 powers of the warring states, Qin, Qi, Chu, Yan, Han, Zhao, and Wei, had taken shape, with the rulers of all 7 eventually declaring themselves kings. Although numerous other states, some at times highly influential, also existed, these 7 stood out as the major powers to survive into the final phase of the warring states, when Qin became the dominant power, prompting subsequent generations to frame the period as a contrast between Qin in the west and the 6 states to the east, and 6 + 1 = 7. The major states of this period had evolved into more clearly defined territorial states, with boundaries that were increasingly demarcated and governed under continuous administrative control. Frontiers were guarded, and the forces of other states were less able to pass through freely. To secure these borders, states sometimes constructed defensive walls. Chu built the Fangcheng, square wall, to mark the boundary between the Central Plains and its heartland in the Han River Basin. Qi constructed walls known as Changcheng, literally long wall, but generally rendered in English as the Great Wall. The Great Wall of Qi defended its southern frontier along the Tai Mountains. Wei built walls along the Luo River to defend against Qin. Numerous smaller internal walls also existed. Along the northern frontier, Qin, Zhao, and Yan each built their own frontier walls, which would eventually be connected into what became known as the Great Wall of China. Most major states had attempted some degree of centralization, even if Qin's reforms were by far the most aggressive and transformative. Counties and commanderies were established, and central governments increasingly appointed officials rather than relying on hereditary positions. While government officials still typically came from the nobility, some nonetheless rose through the ranks from more humble backgrounds. Officials, including high-ranking ministers, were typically paid salaries and operated within standardized systems of promotions and punishments based on performance audits. While exceptional ministers or generals could still receive fiefs, they generally held no administrative authorities there and only collected the tax income. In villages across China, the traditional zhou well-field system had largely become obsolete, replaced by small households of free farmers. In the state of Wei under Li Kui, for example, households were typically assigned 100 mu of land, roughly 5.2 acres in modern terms. These lands were not private property, and states generally extracted about 10% of the produce, along with hay and corvée labor. Governments developed more detailed population registers, allowing allowing them to bypass traditional vassal intermediaries and deal directly with farming households, thus extracting greater resources and manpower, especially for warfare. Farmers frequently struggled to make ends meet, as reformers such as Li Kui prioritized state extraction over individual welfare. Farmers often had to borrow to survive, sometimes at interest rates as high as 100%. Dramatic economic changes also took place during the early Warring States period. Iron tools became prevalent in farming, replacing those made from wood, stone, or bronze, and allowing for deeper plowing. Fertilizers such as ash and bone meal came into use, irrigation spread, and agricultural techniques improved. Craft production expanded significantly, including wood, bronze, jade, pottery, dyes, iron, and silk, with the silk from Qi being especially famous. Salt was a key commodity. Yan and Qi produced sea salt, while Wei sourced it from the Salt Lake in the region of Hedong. Trade flourished, and some merchants accumulated immense wealth. Markets, especially in the Central Plains, featured goods from across China, including horses and dogs from the north, fish, salt, and silk from the east, and leather from the west. Each state maintained its own systems of weights, measures, and coinage. Yan and Qi used knife-shaped coins. The three Jin and Zhou used spade coins, and Chu used shell-shaped bronze coins and gold. At the same time, coins with round or square holes were also in use and would eventually become the standard form of traditional Chinese currency. Cities grew much larger. Linzi, the capital of Qi, measured 3 by 4 kilometers, while Xiadu, a secondary capital of Yan, measured 4 by 4 kilometers. As state power became more institutionalized, economies expanded, and interstate competition intensified, the period began to live up to its name, the Warring States. Warfare expanded dramatically. Rather than the aristocratic-centric warfare of the spring and autumn period, states could now field armies in the hundreds of thousands, with the most powerful perhaps approaching 1 million, although such figures are likely exaggerated. States built vast arsenals, with Han and Chu especially known for producing high-quality weapons. Bronze remained dominant, particularly for halberds and swords, but iron and early steel became increasingly common by the late Warring States. New technologies and tactics reshaped warfare. The crossbow became widespread, with Han's crossbows being especially famous. Infantry gradually replaced chariots as the primary fighting force, while cavalry, although developing, remained limited. Siege equipment such as scaling ladders and battering rams also became more common. States invested heavily in defense. Military command became more centralized, with control over armies enforced through systems such as the Hufu, a split bronze statue of a tiger held in 2 pieces, one by the ruler and one by the commander, that needed to be matched to authorize troop movements. In Qin, excavated evidence suggests that even units of 50 men required such authorization. The early Warring States period saw a rapid growth of new philosophical ideas that emerged amidst the social and political upheaval following the collapse of the Western Zhou dynasty. As interstate competition intensified and literacy spread, especially with the rise of lower-level elites above the commoners, the audience for these ideas grew. Books were becoming increasingly common. They were written not only on wooden and bamboo strips, but also on silk, which was easier to transcribe and carry. Teachers established schools, lineages of scholarship took shape, and ideas spread as scholars traveled across China, flourishing especially at centers of learning, such as the Jixia Academy in Linzi. Ruling elites increasingly turned to these philosophies to gain an edge against their rival states. These competing traditions collectively came to be known as the 100 schools of thought, with 100 simply denoting a great number. Of these schools of philosophy, legalism, largely a political philosophy focused on centralizing administration and competitive state building, became the dominant strain of thought by the mid to late Warring States period as states sought to outcompete one another. with politicians such as Li Kui and Shang considered highly influential legalists. But in the centuries after the Warring States, Confucianism, as advocated by philosophers such as Confucius and Mencius, emphasized building political legitimacy by promoting social harmony, and gradually became the dominant ideology in China, even as legalist principles continue to shape the day-to-day functioning of the state to the present day. Taoism, most strongly associated with the philosophers Lao Tzu, the author of the Tao Te Ching, and Zhuangzi, the author of the Zhuangzi, advocated non-intervention and living in harmony with nature. Military texts also became important, with Sun Tzu's The Art of War being the most influential. Many other schools of philosophy, including Mohism, which promoted principles such as universal love, simple living, and opposition to offensive warfare, have largely been forgotten over time. Given the importance of these ideas, a more detailed discussion is beyond the scope of this video and will be covered separately. Because the centuries of Zhou dynasty rule, including the Warring States period, have been central to the formation of Chinese identity, one way that their legacy has remained visible to this day is in the form of geographical names. In the north, Jin remains synonymous with modern-day Shanxi province, and its official one-character abbreviation is Jin. Several dynasties in Chinese history were also named Jin, most notably the Jin dynasty, which ruled from 266 to 420, so named because its founder had previously held the title the Prince of Jin. Likewise, Yan remains associated with Beijing and its surrounding region, with a number of regional dynasties also taking the name. Nonetheless, modern Beijing, as the national capital, tends to avoid identifying too strongly with any regional designation, instead using the more neutral abbreviation Jing, meaning capital. Qi and Lu correspond closely to modern-day Shandong province. Geographically, the province is essentially a combination of the ancient Qi lands north of Mount Tai and across the Shandong Peninsula, and the ancient Lu heartland in the basin of the Si River, much of which has disappeared after centuries of flooding by the Yellow River. Shandong is often referred to by the amalgam Qi-Lu, although Lu is the province's official modern one-character abbreviation. A few later dynasties also bore the name of Qi, although none succeeded in unifying China. Qi and Lu are also both modern Chinese surnames. Of the Central Plains states discussed in this video, only Zheng is still easy to spot on a modern map. Zhengzhou is the seat of Henan province, and its international airport lies within Xinzheng, the capital of the ancient states of Zheng, and subsequently Han, still preserving its name after 2,700 years. The name Wei Wei mostly survives in the small county-level city of Weihui, while Chen, Cai, and Song are no longer readily visible on the map. Song nonetheless lives on indirectly in the city of Shangqiu, its capital, which in turn takes its name from the Shang dynasty. Song lent its name to the Liu Song dynasty, which ruled southern China from 420 to 479, because its founder traced his ancestry to the Song region. It also lent its name to the Song dynasty, one of China's great dynasties from 960 to 1279, because its founder had earlier been the military governor of the Song region before seizing the throne. And of course, Zheng, Wei, Chen, Cai, and Song all endure as common modern Chinese surnames, with at least some branches tracing their origins to these ancient states. The three Jin states, Han, Zhao, and Wei, perhaps because of their convoluted geography, also have a complex legacy in geographical names, even if all three survive as fairly common surnames today. Han, as expected, is the least visible. Its name was rarely adopted by later political entities, and geographically it largely overlapped with Zheng territory, leaving it with little distinct imprint. Zhao has long been associated with Hebei, the portion of the North China Plain north of the Yellow River, and the name of a modern province. Much of the region had been sparsely populated marshland before Zhao's expansion there in the Warring States. Over the centuries, Hebei has often been referred to as Yanzhao, a name that evokes hardy, heroic soldiers guarding frontier fortifications against nomadic invasions. Within Yanzhao, Yan denotes the immediate frontier around Beijing, while Zhao refers to the vast hinterland behind it, providing it with economic and strategic depth. A few regional dynasties in later centuries were also named Zhao. Wei's geographical legacy, like its actual geography, is the most confusing. Part of far southern Hebei became Wei Commandery during the Han Dynasty. The warlord Cao Cao, during the fall of the Han Dynasty, held this region as his fief, and his subsequent dynasty, the Cao Wei Dynasty, took the name. Other dynasties, most notably the Northern Wei Dynasty, which ruled over northern China for much of the 400s and early 500s, also adopted the name. Meanwhile, the region around Wei's actual capital at Daliang, modern Kaifeng, came to be associated not with Wei, but with Liang, giving its name to the later Liang dynasty during the chaotic 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period in the 900s. Liang is also a common Chinese surname today, with some of its origins tracing to the state of Wei. In the south, the Yangtze River Delta, especially the region around Suzhou, is strongly associated with the state of Wu, which fell during the transition from the Spring and Autumn period to the Warring States period. Wu later became a favored name for regional dynasties based in the lower Yangtze River, most famously the Eastern Wu dynasty during the Three Kingdoms period. The Chinese spoken across the Yangtze Delta, including Shanghainese, is collectively known as Wu Chinese, with over 80 million speakers, and Wu is also one of the most common Chinese surnames. By contrast, Yue, which conquered Wu, no longer carries such a broad regional meaning. Today it is most closely tied to its ancient capital around modern Shaoxing, famed for its rice wine and regional opera, Yue Opera. At the same time, because Yue was once used as a generic label for peoples to the south, the name survives on a much wider stage in the Chinese name for Vietnam, Yunnan. Chu, despite, or perhaps because of, its size, no longer corresponds closely to any single modern region, with its identity instead diffused across the lands it once ruled. It is most strongly associated with its original mid-Yangtze heartland, and modern-day Hubei province, with its seat at Wuhan, carries on that association, although even here it is weaker than, say, Wu in the Yangtze Delta, or Jin in Shanxi. And as we shall see in the next video, Chu would eventually relocate eastward into the basin of the Huai and Si rivers. In the centuries after the Warring States, this region was also strongly associated with Chu, but over time, this association largely faded. Ultimately, much of Chu's history has been buried under centuries of what came after. A few brief and obscure local powers over the centuries have been named Chu, but none significant enough to revitalize the broader use of the name. Qin remains very strongly associated with modern Shanxi province as a whole, and the Wei River Basin in particular, centered around the modern city of Xi'an, which is considered the direct descendant of Qin's capital at Xianyang. Outside of the Qin dynasty, established after the state of Qin conquered the eastern states to end the Warring States period, a few other short-lived dynasties over the centuries were also named Qin. Qin is also now a very common Chinese family name. The original Zhou territory on which the Qin heartland sits, however, bears little modern geographical reminder of Zhou's former existence. It is ironic that even though the Zhou dynasty conquered so much of northern and upper southern China, it ultimately did not retain its name in these areas. Zhou was nonetheless used as the name of a few dynasties over the centuries, and, like Qin, is one of the most common Chinese surnames today. By the mid to late 300s, as our records become somewhat clearer, although still sparse compared to almost all other periods of Chinese history, the major states, including the Seven Powers, had settled into mature geopolitical positions. Competition between them intensified, leading to escalating warfare during what would become one of the most chaotic centuries in Chinese history. In the next video, we will examine these geopolitical struggles in greater detail.